In the winter of 1891, a French engineer named Marcel Auguste Dieulafoy stood atop a crumbling mound in the Khuzestan plain, prying loose a single glazed brick, still blazing turquoise and gold after 24 centuries underground. And in that moment, he held in his hands the wall of a throne room where Darius the Great once received ambassadors from 23 nations. Beneath his feet lay not one city, but dozens, stacked 9,000 years deep, the longest continuous record of urban life anywhere on Earth. How does a single place endure from the age of painted pottery to the age of empire, survive conquest after conquest, and then vanish so completely that the modern world forgot it had ever existed? This is the complete story of Susa. Not a single era, not a highlight, not a fragment. You are about to walk through the entire life of a city, from the first Neolithic families who recognized the power of this river crossing around 7,000 years before Christ, through the centuries of painted beakers and communal burial, into the rise of Proto-Elamite civilization and its still undeciphered script. You will witness the city claimed and reclaimed by Akkadian kings and the lords of Ur, then reborn under the Sukalma dynasty in a golden age of diplomacy and bronze. You will stand in the shadow of Shutruk-Nahunte, the plunderer king who sacked Babylon and dragged the stele of Hammurabi back to Susa as a trophy of war. You will see Darius the Great raise his Apadana, 36 columns soaring 20 meters high, its walls alive with glazed archers and roaring lions, while 4 languages echoed through its corridors. You will walk the streets of the royal city at its peak, through artisan workshops and grain stores, past seal cutters and weavers, into the daily rhythm of an ancient capital. Then you will watch Alexander seize 50,000 talents of silver from its treasury, witness the slow transformation under Seleucid and Parthian rule, and finally see the Mongol storm reduce 9 millennia of habitation to silence. And at the end, you will follow the archaeologists who returned, trowel by trowel, to pull this city back from oblivion. What makes Susa irreplaceable is not merely its age. It is the fact that this single site preserves the entire arc of human civilization in one vertical column of earth. The invention of administration, the birth of monumental architecture, the first experiments in imperial multiculturalism, the oldest known legal code displayed as public monument, all of these passed through this ground. Without Susa, we would not possess the code of Hammurabi. Without Susa, we would not understand how Elam rivaled and shaped Mesopotamia for 2,000 years. This city was not peripheral to the ancient world. It was the hinge between East and West, the place where the Iranian plateau met the Tigris-Euphrates lowland, where lapis lazuli from Afghanistan changed hands for Sumerian grain, where empire after empire recognized that whoever held this crossroads commanded the continent. If you find yourself drawn to complete journeys through the great cities of the ancient world, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring back to life a world built in mud brick, glazed brick, and stone, one city at a time, from its first breath to its last. Let us begin where the Shah River meets the Des, where the soil is dark with flood silt, and where someone 9,000 years ago looked at this ground and decided to stay. Long before any king claimed this ground, long before any wall or temple rose from the earth, the land itself was already speaking. The Khuzestan plain stretches westward from the Zagros foothills in a vast apron of alluvial soil, carried down over millennia by rivers swollen with snowmelt. The Shar and the Des converge here, their waters braiding through marshland and reed beds before joining the greater Karun on its slow passage toward the Persian Gulf. This is lowland country, hot and flat, but it is not empty country. The rivers deposit silt rich in nutrients. The soil yields grain without great labor. Fish crowd the shallows. Waterfowl nest in the reeds by the thousands. And to the east, the mountains rise like a wall, channeling every traveler, every merchant, every herd of animals through the narrow passes that open onto this plain. It is here, at the place where highland meets lowland, where the roots from the Iranian plateau descend into the Mesopotamian world, that a low mound begins to grow. Around 7,000 years before the Common Era, the earliest settlers choose a slight natural elevation near the river confluence. They are farming people. They cultivate emmer wheat and barley. They keep goats and cattle. Their dwellings are modest. Packed earth floors, walls of sun-dried mud, roofs of bundled reeds. They bury their dead nearby. They make pottery by hand, simple at first, functional, but they have chosen well. The ground beneath them will accumulate the debris of human habitation for 9,000 years. This is the mound the French excavators will one day call the Acropole. Its lowest strata hold the compressed memory of those first villages, ash layers, animal bone, broken storage jars, the faint outlines of post holes. The occupation is not continuous in every century, but it is persistent. People return to this spot again and again, generation after generation, because the geographic logic is unanswerable. The rivers provide water and fish. The plain provides grain. The mountain passes provide access to tin, copper, obsidian, and eventually lapis lazuli from lands far to the east. Susa sits at the hinge of two worlds. By the 5th millennium before the Common Era, something remarkable emerges from the kilns of this growing settlement. Potters begin producing thin-walled ceramic beakers of astonishing refinement, buff-colored vessels painted in dark pigment with images drawn from the natural world. Long-horned ibex leap in stylized arcs around the rims. Waterbirds stand in geometric rows. Hunting dogs stretch into elegant, elongated forms that seem almost abstract. The brushwork is confident, rhythmic, precise. These are not crude village wares. They represent a community with surplus time, specialized craft skill, and a shared visual language of extraordinary sophistication. Archaeologists have recovered hundreds of these painted vessels from the Acropole mound and from the cemetery levels nearby. Some were placed with the dead in communal burial areas, their surfaces still vivid after 6,000 years in the earth. The geometric patterns, nested chevrons, concentric circles, cross-hatched bands, suggest a symbolic vocabulary whose meaning is now lost but whose aesthetic discipline is unmistakable. This is a society organizing itself, developing shared rituals, investing labor in objects meant to endure beyond a single life. The settlement grows, the mound rises, layer presses down upon layer, floor upon floor, hearth upon hearth, the slow, vertical architecture of continuous habitation. The rivers still run. The mountain passes still funnel travelers down onto the plain. And on this low rise above the floodwater line, a city is preparing to be born. not yet a city of kings or temples or written law, but a place already ancient, already rooted, already watching the caravans pass. Sometime around 4,500 years before the Common Era, the settlement on the Acropole Mound begins to change. What had been a village of painted potters and grain farmers undertakes something far more ambitious, a collective act of construction that will reshape the hilltop itself. Thousands of mud bricks, hand-formed and sun-dried on the plain below, are carried upward and laid into a massive terrace platform. Layer upon layer, the earth is raised deliberately, artificially, until the summit stands 11 meters above the surrounding floodplain. This is not a house. This is not a granary. This is architecture with intention beyond shelter, a high place meant to be seen from the river, from the caravan tracks, from the distant shimmer of the marshes to the south. The platform dominates. Its flat summit, roughly 80 meters on a side, supports structures whose mud brick walls are thicker than any domestic building requires. Post holes suggest roofed halls. Ash deposits and animal bone concentrations point to repeated feasting or offering. The community that builds this terrace is not a city in any later sense. There are no palaces, no written archives, no monumental sculpture. But it is organizing labor at a scale that demands coordination, shared purpose, and something that functions like authority. Below the platform and across the lower slopes of the mound, the dead begin to accumulate in ways that reveal a startling communal logic. Excavators uncovering these levels find not individual graves, but ossuaries, large collective deposits, where the disarticulated bones of dozens, sometimes hundreds of individuals are gathered together. Skulls separated from bodies. Long bones stacked in bundles. The flesh has been removed before burial, whether by exposure, by deliberate defleshing, or by secondary collection after initial interment elsewhere. Copper mirrors, stone mace heads, and small ceramic vessels accompany the bones. This is not casual disposal. It is ritual architecture for the dead, a system in which individual identity dissolves into the collective, and the ancestors become a single presence beneath the ceremonial ground above. Stamp seals appear in these same levels. Small, carved from soft stone or bone, pressed into wet clay to leave geometric impressions, crosses, spirals, animal forms. They mark property, authenticate containers, signal identity or office. Each seal is unique. Each impression is a signature in a world without writing. The sealed clay bullae found at Susa connect it to a wider administrative practice spreading across the ancient Near East, from the Zagros foothills to the Mesopotamian lowlands. And it is Mesopotamia, specifically the great city of Uruk, 500 kilometers to the west, that casts the longest shadow across Susa in the late 4th millennium. Uruk is building the largest temples in the world, developing cylinder seals, inventing the earliest accounting tokens that will evolve into cuneiform. Susa absorbs these influences but does not simply imitate. Uruk-style beveled rim bowls appear at Susa, mass-produced vessels likely used for distributing rations, evidence of administered labor. Cylinder seals of Uruk type are found alongside local stamp seal traditions. The architecture grows more complex. Niched and buttressed facades, a hallmark of Mesopotamian temple design, appear on the platform buildings. Yet Susa remains distinct. Its ossuary tradition has no parallel at Uruk. Its painted pottery, though declining in elaboration, retains local character. The city sits at the hinge between two worlds, the Mesopotamian alluvium to the west and the Iranian plateau rising to the east, and it draws from both without belonging entirely to either. By 3100 before the Common Era, the platform has been rebuilt, enlarged and rebuilt again. The mound is a palimpsest of ceremonial ambition. The dead lie in their thousands beneath the living. Seal impressions multiply, marking an economy growing in complexity. The settlement is no longer a village with a shrine. It is a ceremonial center commanding regional loyalty, managing surplus, housing specialists, receiving goods from distant highlands. The bones of the ancestors hold the ground. The platform holds the sky. And on the edge of a new millennium, something unprecedented is about to emerge from this place. A script, a system, a way of recording the world that will owe nothing to Mesopotamia. Susa is preparing to write. The clay is still damp when the stylus presses into it. Not a picture of a goat, not a sketch of a jar, something else entirely. A sign, an abstraction, a mark that stands for a quantity, a transaction, a debt owed or a shipment received. Around 3100 before the Common Era, scribes at Susa begin pressing these signs into small rectangular tablets, creating a recording system that owes nothing to the contemporary developments at Uruk. This is Proto-Elamite script, born here, on this mound, in this city that has always stood between worlds. The tablets are small enough to hold in one hand. Their surfaces carry columns of signs, some numerical, some ideographic, arranged in cases divided by incised lines. Over 1,500 tablets from this period survive, recovered from the Acropole mound and from sites scattered across the Iranian plateau as far east as Shari Sokhta near the Afghan border. The script appears fully formed, with no clear developmental sequence preceding it. Whatever experiments led to its creation have left no trace or have not yet been found. What is certain is that Proto-Elamite writing emerges at Susa and radiates outward, carried along trade routes into the highlands. The signs remain undeciphered. Scholars recognize numerical notations, systems for counting discrete objects, for measuring grain, for recording livestock. But the language behind the ideograms is unknown. These tablets are administrative in nature. Inventories, accounts, disbursements. They speak of an economy managing complexity across distance. Susa is not merely a local center anymore. It is the lowland terminus of a network stretching deep into the plateau, and these tablets are the instruments of that network's coordination. The goods flowing through the city leave their own testimony. Chlorite vessels carved with geometric patterns and animal motifs arrive from workshops in southeastern Iran, perhaps from Tepe Yahya, over 1,000 kilometers away. Lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan in distant Afghanistan passes through intermediary stations before reaching Susa's storerooms. Carnelian, copper, tin, the raw materials of Bronze Age prestige, move along routes that Susa commands by virtue of its position at the edge of the Mesopotamian lowland. The city's architecture in this period reflects administrative confidence. Storage facilities cluster near the Acropole. Seal impressions multiply on clay bulle. Hollow balls that once enclosed counting tokens, now replaced by the more efficient tablet. The seals themselves depict scenes of animal husbandry, processions, and figures engaged in what may be ritual activity. Their imagery is distinct from Mesopotamian glyptic art, more angular, more abstract, with a preference for geometric patterning that echoes the painted pottery of earlier centuries. Susa in this era is not a Mesopotamian colony. It is not an outpost of Uruk, despite sharing certain architectural and administrative concepts with that great city during the preceding Uruk expansion. The Proto-Elamite system represents an independent response to the same pressures that produced cuneiform, the need to track surplus, manage labor, and coordinate exchange across distances too great for memory alone. The scribes of Susa solved this problem in their own way, with their own signs, their own numerical conventions, their own administrative logic. By 2700 before the Common Era, the Proto-Elamite script falls silent. The tablets cease, the reasons remain debated, political fragmentation, shifts in trade routes, the absorption of Elamite administrative functions into Mesopotamian systems as Sumerian influence grows. But for 4 centuries, Susa possessed a writing tradition independent of Babylon, independent of Ur, independent of any Mesopotamian city. The tablets lie in the earth of the Acropole, waiting nearly 5,000 years before excavators will lift them into the light and confront their stubborn, beautiful illegibility. The signs still guard their secrets. The city that made them moves forward into a new age, one where the powers of Mesopotamia will reach across the plain and claim this crossroads for themselves. The powers of the Tigris and Euphrates Valley arrive not as traders, but as conquerors. Around 2300 before the Common Era, the armies of Sargon of Akkad sweep across southern Mesopotamia, crushing the old Sumerian city-states one by one, and their momentum carries them eastward, across the plain, toward the Zagros foothills, toward Susa. The city that had maintained its own script, its own ceramic traditions, its own burial customs for centuries, now falls within the orbit of the first true empire the world has known. Akkadian governors take residence on the mounds. Administrative documents shift to the Akkadian language, written in the cuneiform script of Mesopotamia. Cylinder seals carved in the vigorous Akkadian style, combat scenes, mythological beasts, the king as triumphant warrior, appear in the archaeological layers. Susa becomes a provincial seat, its ancient autonomy subordinated to a throne in distant Agade. Yet the city is not destroyed. It is too valuable. It commands the routes eastward, the passes into the highlands where copper, tin, and precious stones originate. The Akkadian kings need Susa precisely because it is a gateway. For nearly 2 centuries, Akkadian power holds. Then it fractures. The empire collapses under pressure from the Gutians and internal revolt, and in this vacuum a remarkable figure emerges at Susa. Puzur-in-Shushinak, governor under the last Akkadian overlords, seizes independence around 2100 before the Common Era. He declares himself king of Awan, builds temples, commissions inscriptions in both Akkadian cuneiform and the old linear Elamite script, a deliberate assertion of local identity. His victory stele, carved in dark stone, shows him trampling enemies beneath his feet. For a brief, brilliant moment, Susa is its own master again. It does not last. From the south, the 3rd dynasty of Ur rises to dominance under Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi. By roughly 2080 before the Common Era, Ur's armies reclaim the Khuzestan plain. Susa becomes a province of the Ur III state, administered by military governors appointed from the Sumerian capital. Thousands of cuneiform tablets from this period document the meticulous bureaucracy of empire, grain shipments, labor rosters, livestock counts, offerings to temples. Susa's own goddess Inshushinak receives dedications in Sumerian. The city's Elamite identity persists beneath the administrative surface, but its political voice is muted. Fortification walls thicken in these centuries. Each new overlord reinforces the defenses, not against the city's own people, but against the highlands beyond, against the Shemashki chiefs and Elamite confederacies who press from the mountains. Susa sits precisely on the fault line between lowland imperial control and highland resistance. Its mud-brick ramparts bear the scars of repeated rebuilding, visible in excavation as alternating layers of construction and hasty repair. Around 24 before the Common Era, the III dynasty weakens. Elamite forces under the Shemashki dynasty strike westward. Kindatu of Shemashki captures Ibisin, the last king of Ur, and carries him back to Elam in chains, a reversal of fortune that echoes across Mesopotamian literature for centuries. Susa passes once more into Elamite hands. 7 centuries of oscillation leave their mark in the stratigraphy. Akkadian seal impressions lie beside Elamite figurines. Sumerian administrative tablets rest in rooms whose architecture follows highland traditions. The city absorbs each conqueror's bureaucracy without losing its deeper identity, its position, its function, its indispensability as the hinge between two worlds. No empire can hold the eastern trade routes without holding Susa, and no empire can hold Susa forever. When the Shemashki kings fade from the record, a new dynasty rises to fill the silence. The Sukalmar, the Grand Regents, emerge around the turn of the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, and they will hold Susa and the Elamite highlands together for nearly 5 centuries. It is the longest period of political stability the city has ever known. The title itself reveals the architecture of power. The Sukalmar sits at the apex, a supreme regent whose authority stretches from the lowland plains to the mountain valleys of the Zagros. Beneath him rules the Sukal of Susa, often a brother or son, governing the city and its hinterland. A third figure, the Sukal of Elam and Shemashki, administers the highland territories. Power circulates within a single extended family, passing not always from father to son, but frequently from brother to brother, from uncle to nephew, a system of lateral succession that bewilders later scholars, but proves remarkably durable. Susa flourishes under this arrangement. The palace complex on the Acropole Mound expands, its mud-brick walls thickening, its courtyards multiplying. Rooms fill with administrative tablets, but these are written overwhelmingly in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the age. The Sukalma lords conduct business in the language of Mesopotamia because their world is deeply entangled with it. Legal contracts record property sales, inheritance disputes, loans of silver and grain. Marriage agreements bind Elamite princesses to Babylonian rulers and Babylonian women to Elamite courts. The tablets reveal a society that is bilingual, commercially sophisticated, and juridically precise. Bronze figurines appear in temple deposits, small, finely cast figures of worshippers with clasped hands, their faces smooth, their postures reverent. They stand before Inshushinak, the great god of Susa, whose temple precinct on the Acropole receives continuous renovation. Cylinder seals from this period show hybrid imagery, Mesopotamian contest scenes alongside distinctly Elamite motifs of serpents and seated deities. The art, like the city, exists between two traditions without belonging entirely to either. Trade sustains this golden age. Tin moves westward from the Afghan highlands through Susa toward the bronze workshops of Babylonia. Textiles travel eastward. The administrative archives mention shipments of wool, barley, sesame oil, and copper. Susa's merchants operate across vast distances, and the Sukalma court taxes and regulates this commerce with bureaucratic care. Seal impressions on clay boulets, small lumps of clay pressed over knotted strings that secure containers, testify to a system of accounting that tracks goods from warehouse to destination. The residential quarters of the Ville Royale mound grow denser. Houses cluster along narrow lanes, their rooms arranged around small interior courtyards. Grinding stones sit near bread ovens. Ceramic vessels, utilitarian jars, spouted pitchers, shallow bowls, fill storage rooms. Life in Susa during the Sukalma centuries is urban, organized, and remarkably continuous. Generations are born, work, worship, and are buried beneath their own floors without the catastrophic interruptions that mark earlier periods. Yet the Sukalma world is not sealed. Diplomatic correspondence with Babylon under Hammurabi's successors shows a relationship of wary equality. Elam and Babylonia exchange ambassadors, negotiate borders, and occasionally threaten war. The balance holds because neither side can afford to lose access to the trade that flows through Susa. By the 16th century before the Common Era, the Sukalma dynasty begins to weaken. The administrative tablets thin out. The palace archives fall silent. The reasons remain unclear. Perhaps succession disputes fractured the lateral system that had held for so long. Perhaps shifts in trade routes diminished the revenues that sustained the court. The archaeological record shows no dramatic destruction, no fire layer, no siege. The Golden Age does not end in catastrophe. It simply fades, like a lamp burning low in a room where no one comes to add more oil. The city endures, waiting for the next dynasty to claim its walls and fill its archives with fresh clay. The new dynasty arrives with fire in its hands. Around 1400 before the Common Era, a line of kings known to modern scholars as the Igihalkid dynasty seizes power in Elam, and Susa awakens from its long administrative silence. The city's temples receive fresh dedications. New bricks bear new names. But it is the generation that follows, the Shutrukid predecessors and their contemporaries, who will reshape the Elamite world in stone and glazed clay on a scale never before attempted. The king who transforms everything is Untold, who reigns in the 13th century before the Common Era. He does not merely restore Susa. He builds an entirely new sacred city roughly 30 kilometers to the southeast, at a site the Elamites call Al-Untold, known today as Choga Zanbil. Here, on open ground between the rivers Des and Karke, his workers raise the greatest ziggurat ever constructed outside Mesopotamia. It rises in 5 concentric tiers of mud brick, each level stepping inward, climbing to a height estimated at more than 50 meters. Unlike Mesopotamian ziggurats built as solid stacked platforms, this structure is designed with each tier rising independently from ground level, an engineering choice unique to Elamite architecture. Thousands of inscribed bricks repeat the king's name and his dedication to the god Inshushinak, lord of Susa, and to Napirisha, the great god of the highlands. The ziggurat stands at the center of a vast sacred precinct, enclosed by 3 concentric walls. Between these walls, smaller temples honor deities from across the Elamite Federation, highland gods and lowland gods worshipped side by side, a theological statement of imperial unity. Glazed knob bricks in turquoise and green stud the temple facades, catching the Khuzestan sun and scattering light across the courtyards. Bronze and copper statues of guardian figures flank doorways. A water channel system feeds ritual basins within the precinct, and underground vaulted tombs beneath the temples await royal burials that may never have been completed. Yet Susa itself is not abandoned. It remains the administrative heart, the older capital whose archives and storerooms continue to function. Untold invests in both cities simultaneously. At Susa, temple precincts receive new glazed decoration, and royal inscriptions in Elamite appear on foundation deposits buried beneath sanctuary floors. The city operates as co-capital, the seat of government and trade, while Khuzestan serves as the dynasty's sacred showpiece, a statement carved into the landscape itself. The Middle Elamite kings who follow Untold continue to expand this dual system. Bronze casting reaches extraordinary refinement. A life-sized bronze statue of Queen Napirasu, wife of Untold, survives, cast in a single massive paw, weighing nearly 1,800 kilograms, her hands clasped in a gesture of devotion. The technical mastery required to produce such a casting rivals anything in the contemporary Bronze Age world. Elamite power radiates outward. Military campaigns push into Mesopotamian territory. Diplomatic correspondence flows between Elamite courts and Kassite Babylon. Susa's workshops produce cylinder seals of distinctive Elamite style, coiled serpents, seated deities, ritual scenes carved in fine stone. Administrative tablets record grain distributions, temple offerings, and labor assignments in a bureaucracy growing more complex with each generation. But Khuzestan, for all its grandeur, appears never to have been fully completed. Some temples within the outer walls remain unfinished. The royal tombs beneath the ziggurat show signs of partial use at best. Untold vision may have exceeded even Elam's considerable resources. After his death, no successor invests further in the sacred city. It stands in the heat, magnificent and increasingly quiet, while Susa continues to pulse with the business of empire. The administrative capital outlasts the ceremonial one. The archives keep filling, the kilns keep burning, and in the next century a king will rise at Susa who looks not southeast toward his own monuments, but west toward Babylon and its treasures. That king is Shutruk-Nahunta. He comes to power around 1150 years before the Common Era, and he inherits an Elam already swollen with confidence. The Kassite dynasty that has ruled Babylon for centuries is weakening, its grip on southern Mesopotamia loosening with each passing decade. Shutruk-Nahunta sees the fracture and drives straight into it. The campaign is not a border raid. It is a systematic invasion of the Mesopotamian heartland. Elamite armies cross the Tigris, sweep through the old Sumerian south, and fall upon Babylon itself. The Kassite king is deposed. The city that had dominated the ancient world's imagination for 1,000 years lies open to Elamite hands. And Shutruk-Nahunta does something extraordinary. He does not merely loot gold and silver. He takes monuments. The great diorite stele of Hammurabi, carved 6 centuries earlier and inscribed with the most famous law code the ancient world produced, is pried from its foundation and loaded onto transport. The victory stele of Naram-Sin of Akkad, older still, depicting the Akkadian king ascending a mountain over his fallen enemies, is seized alongside it. Boundary stones, carved kudurus recording Kassite land grants, are gathered by the dozen. Statues of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, are carried east. These are not random spoils. They are the symbolic architecture of Mesopotamian authority itself, and Shutruk-Nahunte understands their power with perfect clarity. He brings them home to Susa. The captured monuments are re-erected on the Acropole and in the temple precincts, arranged as declarations of Elamite supremacy. Shutruk-Nahunte adds his own inscriptions to several of them, carving Elamite text onto Babylonian stone, layering his name over the memory of foreign kings. The stele of Naram-Sin receives a new inscription identifying the Elamite conqueror who claimed it. Hammurabi's law code stands now not in Babylon's Temple of Shamash, but in Susa's sacred precinct, a trophy testifying that the world's order has shifted eastward. The city transforms into a museum of conquered power. Brick inscriptions multiply across Susa's temples and walls, each one naming Shutruk-Nahunte as restorer, builder, conqueror. His son Kutir-Nahunte continues the campaign, sacking Babylon again and carrying off the statue of Marduk, an act of such sacrilege that Babylonian chronicles will remember it with horror for centuries. A second son, Shilhak-in-Shushinak, proves the dynasty's greatest builder, raising and restoring temples across Elam, recording his works in long Elamite inscriptions that constitute some of the richest royal texts the civilization ever produced. For 3 generations, Susa stands at the center of the Near Eastern world. Its temples gleam with foreign stone. Its storerooms hold the administrative wealth of 2 empires. The Inshushinak temple precinct on the Acropole receives offerings alongside Babylonian divine statues, sacred objects from alien traditions displayed in Elamite sacred space. But the plunder carries a curse of memory. Babylon does not forget. Around 1110 before the Common Era, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar I launches a campaign of revenge. His armies strike deep into Elamite territory. The statue of Marduk is recovered. Elam fractures under the blow. The dynasty of Shutruk-Nahunte collapses, and Susa enters a period of profound silence. For nearly 3 centuries, the historical record goes almost dark. No royal inscriptions, no monumental construction, no administrative archives survive in quantity. The trophies remain. Hammurabi's stele stays where it was placed, standing in Susa's earth through the long silence, through the dust and the forgetting, waiting in the dark for the French excavators who will uncover it nearly 3,000 years later. The plunderer king's greatest legacy is not what he built, but what he stole, and what that theft preserved. The silence is not empty. It is the silence of a city breathing in the dark, reduced but not extinguished, its population thinned, its temples unrepaired, its scribes producing so little that the centuries between roughly 1100 and 800 before the Common Era leave almost no written trace. The great platform of the Acropole still rises above the shore, but no king inscribes his name upon it. The stolen monuments of Babylon stand untended in their courtyards, gathering dust. Susa endures, as it has always endured, but it endures without voice. The archaeological record for these centuries is read not in inscriptions, but in ceramic sequences, in the quiet evidence of occupation layers that continue without interruption. People live here. They grind grain, fire pots, bury their dead. But the monumental ambition that raised ziggurats and plundered empires has gone cold. Elam itself has fractured into small kingdoms scattered across the highlands and the lowland plain, each too weak to project power, too isolated to produce the administrative apparatus that generates archives. Then, slowly, around 800 before the Common Era, signs of revival appear. A series of Neo-Elamite kings begin to reassert authority from Susa and from highland centers like Anshan. Their names appear again on bricks and on cylinder seals: Huban Nikash, Shuto Nahunta, Halushu Inshushinak. The city stirs. Temple precincts receive new dedications. Diplomatic contact with Babylonia resumes, sometimes as alliance, sometimes as rivalry. Elamite forces intervene in Mesopotamian affairs, supporting Babylonian factions against the growing shadow in the north. That shadow is Assyria. The Neo-Assyrian Empire under Sargon II, Sennacherib, and their successors has become the most formidable military machine the ancient world has yet produced. Elam's interference in Babylonian politics draws Assyrian attention eastward like a blade turning toward its target. Campaigns are launched, border territories change hands, the tension builds across decades. The final reckoning comes under Ashurbanipal. Around 647 before the Common Era, Assyrian armies cross into Elamite territory. The campaign is methodical and merciless. Ashurbanipal's own palace reliefs at Nineveh, carved in alabaster with extraordinary precision, depict the destruction in clinical detail, Elamite cities burning, their populations marched into captivity, their gods carried away on Assyrian carts. Susa itself falls around 646 before the Common Era. The reliefs show what happens next. Ashurbanipal's sculptors depict the sack with a conqueror's pride. Temples torn open, royal tombs violated, the sacred groves cut down. The Assyrian king boasts in his annals that he carried off the wealth accumulated over generations, that he salted the fields, that he silenced the land so completely that the sound of human voices and the footsteps of cattle vanished from its pastures. The language is formulaic, the exaggeration deliberate, but the destruction layers in the archaeological record confirm that something catastrophic occurred. Burned mud brick, collapsed walls, and abandonment horizons mark the stratigraphy of this period across multiple mounds. Susa does not die. Even Ashurbanipal's fury cannot erase 9,000 years of habitation from a site so geographically favored. But the Elamite kingdom as a coherent political entity is shattered beyond recovery. The language persists. Elamite will survive as an administrative tongue for centuries yet, carried forward by the very empire that will next claim this ground. The temples will be rebuilt, the platform will rise again. But the civilization that gave Susa its first great identity, that built Choga Zanbil and plundered Babylon, and wrote in a script the world still struggles to fully read, has received its mortal wound. When the next masters arrive, horsemen from the highlands, speakers of an Indo-Iranian tongue, builders of something the world has never seen, they will find a city humbled, ancient, and waiting. They come from the highlands of Fars, these Persians, horsemen and spearmen who speak an Indo-Iranian tongue and worship a god of truth and light. Their king Cyrus takes Babylon in 539 before the Common Era, and his empire swallows the ancient world from the Aegean to the Indus. But it is his successor's successor who looks at the humbled mounds beside the Shaw River and sees not ruin but possibility. Darius, son of Hystaspes, seizes the throne in 522 after a year of rebellion and civil war. He needs capitals that proclaim legitimacy across every horizon of his vast domain. Pasargadae belongs to Cyrus. Persepolis he will build for ceremony and for the gods. But Susa, ancient, centrally positioned, commanding the roads between Mesopotamia and the plateau, Susa he chooses for administration, for winter residence, for the daily machinery of empire. The city that Ashurbanipal burned barely 80 years earlier will rise again, grander than anything Elam ever imagined. Darius leaves nothing to oral tradition. He commissions a foundation charter, the DSF inscription, inscribed on clay tablets deposited beneath the walls of his new palace. The text survives in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, and it reads like a bill of materials for the known world. Cedar timber comes from Lebanon. Yucca wood arrives from Gandhara and Carmania. Gold is brought from Sardis and Bactria. Lapis lazuli and carnelian travel from Sogdiana. Turquoise comes from Chorasmia. Silver and ebony from Egypt. Ivory from Ethiopia and Sind. Stone columns are quarried at a village called Abiradu in Elam and dressed by Ionian and Sardian stone cutters. Babylonians mold the bricks. Medes and Egyptians work the gold. The palace is not merely built, it is assembled from the tribute of 23 subject nations, each named, each contributing the material for which its land is known. The great audience hall, the Apadana, rises on the levelled ground of the royal city mound. 36 limestone columns, each standing nearly 20 meters tall, support a cedar roof spanning an area of over 10,000 square meters. The column bases rest on foundation pads of gravel and compacted earth, engineered to bear immense weight on alluvial soil. Bull-shaped capitals crown the shafts, their double protomes supporting the roof beams in their carved shoulders. The hall can hold thousands, ambassadors, satraps, military commanders, scribes bearing tablets in 4 languages. Along the outer walls, glazed brick panels blaze with color. Rows of soldiers march in profile, the immortals, Darius's elite 10,000, rendered in turquoise and gold and white against deep blue backgrounds. Each archer carries a spear, a quiver, a bow. Their robes fall in precise geometric folds. Beside them, panels of striding lions bare their teeth in ochre and teal, and winged griffins rear above lotus borders. These are not mere decoration. They are theology made visible, the ordered cosmos under the king's protection, chaos held at bay by imperial discipline. Beneath the floors, foundation deposits of gold and silver plaques bear Darius's name and titles in 3 scripts. The ground itself is made to remember who built here. Drainage channels of baked brick carry rainwater away from the column bases. The engineering is precise, practical, and designed to endure. The old Elamite language does not vanish. Darius employs it for administrative records. The fortification tablets from Persepolis show Elamite scribes managing the empire's logistics. At Susa, the tongue of the conquered becomes the bureaucratic instrument of the conqueror. 9,000 years of habitation have given this ground a gravity that even the King of Kings acknowledges. He does not erase the past. He builds upon it, literally and symbolically, raising his columns on the same platform where Elamite temples once stood, using the same river water, the same alluvial clay, fired in the same kilns. The city that waited in silence has found its voice again, and it speaks now to every corner of the earth. Darius does not live to see his capital finished. When he dies in 486 before the Common Era, the work passes to his son Xerxes, who inherits both the throne and the unfinished grandeur of Susa's palatial complex. Xerxes extends the monumental gate, a structure modeled on the gate of all nations at Persepolis, flanked by colossal stone bulls whose muscled haunches and curled beards announce imperial authority to every ambassador ascending the ramp. The bulls stand nearly 4 meters tall, carved from grey limestone, hauled from quarries in the Zagros foothills. Their eyes, once painted, gaze outward across the Khuzestan plain as if daring the horizon to produce a challenger. Beyond the gate, the palace quarter expands. Xerxes adds residential wings, their corridors paved with baked brick, their walls faced with glazed panels in deep cobalt and turquoise. Winged griffins stride in procession along these walls, composite creatures with eagle heads, lion bodies, and feathered wings rendered in molded relief, each brick fitted precisely into its neighbor, so the image flows unbroken across entire facades. The technique is Babylonian in origin, but perfected here at a scale that surpasses anything Nebuchadnezzar achieved. The colors remain vivid even in fragments, a particular copper-based turquoise that Susian kilns produce with remarkable consistency. The royal city quarter, the Ville Royale mound, grows denser in this period. Administrative buildings cluster near the palace, their storerooms sealed with clay bullae stamped by officials' cylinder seals. The fortification walls receive new courses of mud brick, their bases reinforced with baked brick set in bitumen mortar against the seasonal flooding of the shower. Guard towers punctuate the circuit at regular intervals, their flat roofs offering sight lines across the irrigated fields that feed the capital's population. Then catastrophe. Sometime during the reign of Artaxerxes I, around 440 before the Common Era, fire sweeps through the Apadana. The cedar roof beams, those timbers carried from Lebanon across 1,500 kilometers, burn with terrible intensity. The great columns survive, their stone too massive to shatter, but the hall stands roofless, its glazed brick panels cracked and blackened by heat. The destruction layer is unmistakable in excavation, a thick stratum of ash and charred wood separating 2 phases of palatial occupation. The rebuilding falls to Artaxerxes II, who commissions a new Apadana on the same platform around 404 before the Common Era. His foundation inscription, preserved in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, records the restoration explicitly. New column drums are shaped and raised, fresh glazed panels are fired, roaring lions in golden yellow against backgrounds of pale blue, their manes rendered in individual curls of molded clay. The rebuilt hall may be slightly smaller, but its decoration is no less magnificent. Stone column bases in the form of double-bowl protomes support the weight of new cedar beams above. For a century and a half after Darius first broke ground, the palace complex functions as the winter residence of the Achaemenid court. Each autumn, when highland Persepolis grows cold, the administration migrates westward to the warmth of the Khuzestan lowland. The corridors fill with the rustle of court robes, the scratch of reed stylus on wet clay, the measured footsteps of the immortals in their embroidered tunics. Tribute flows inward along the royal road, gold from Lydia, ivory from Kush, textiles from Babylon, and is catalogued, stored, redistributed from these very rooms. The walls endure through the reigns of Artaxerxes III and the brief, violent rule of Darius III. By 331 before the Common Era, when Macedonian cavalry appears on the western horizon, the palace still stands, battered by time, patched by successive kings, but fundamentally the same structure Darius the Great envisioned. Its treasury vaults remain sealed, its glazed lions still roar in silence along corridors that have known no foreign conqueror in 2 centuries. That silence is about to end. But the palace is not the whole city. Beyond the columned halls where kings receive tribute, beyond the glazed lions and the polished stone corridors, Susa breathes with the ordinary rhythms of tens of thousands of lives. The Ville Royale mound, rising east of the royal compound, holds the densest evidence of this breathing. Layer upon layer of domestic architecture spanning the Achaemenid centuries, narrow streets pressed between mud brick walls, courtyards open to a sky white with heat. The houses are modest but not mean. Walls of sun-dried brick rise 2 or sometimes 3 stories, plastered smooth inside, their flat roofs serving as sleeping platforms through the brutal Khuzestan summers when temperatures climb beyond what anybody can comfortably endure indoors. Rooms are small and functional. Grinding stones of basalt sit in kitchen corners, their surfaces worn concave by decades of milling barley and emmer wheat into flour. Storage jars, thick-walled, wide-mouthed vessels sunk into earthen floors, hold sesame oil, dried dates, and beer. The smell of baking flatbread drifts through alleys barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Artisan quarters cluster along the southern edge of the mound. Here the kilns leave their unmistakable signature in the archaeological record. Thick deposits of ash, warped ceramic wasters, and the vitrified lining of firing chambers. Potters produce utilitarian wares in enormous quantities. Bowls, storage vessels, cooking pots, alongside finer pieces that echo older Elamite traditions in their forms. Metalworkers operate nearby, their crucible fragments bearing traces of copper and bronze. The sound of hammering carries across the rooftops. The administrative machinery of empire reaches even into these streets. Claybole, lumps of clay pressed over string bindings that sealed containers and documents, bear the impressions of cylinder seals depicting the king as hero, grasping lions, standing beneath the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda. These tiny objects are the fingerprints of bureaucracy. Every shipment of grain taxed, every allocation of rations distributed, every transfer of goods between royal storehouses leaves its mark in fired clay. Tablets in Elamite script record the movement of workers, the quantities of barley issued to laborers, the silver weighed out for services rendered. Susa's scribes still write in Elamite for local administration, even as Aramaic serves the broader empire. A linguistic layering that speaks to the city's deep memory. Religious life persists in forms both Persian and older. Small terracotta figurines of nude female forms appear in domestic contexts, echoing traditions far older than Zoroastrian practice. Whether these represent household devotion to an Elamite goddess or something more syncretic remains debated. What is clear is that Susa's spiritual landscape is not monolithic. Temples receive offerings. Ritual vessels appear in excavated contexts alongside everyday cooking ware. Textile production leaves subtler traces, spindle whirls of stone and ceramic, loom weights clustered in rooms that served as weaving workshops. Administrative records reference garments issued to workers and officials, specifying quantities of wool and linen. The women who spin and weave in these rooms are largely invisible in the written record, yet the cloth they produce clothes an empire's functionaries. Water management sustains everything. Channels divert flow from the Shah River through the lower city, feeding gardens and cisterns. The alluvial soil of the Khuzestan plain yields abundantly when irrigated. Wheat, barley, date palms heavy with fruit in autumn. This agricultural surplus is the foundation upon which palace and workshop alike depend. For nearly 2 centuries this rhythm holds. Generations are born, labor, and die within these mud-brick walls. Children play in courtyards where their grandmothers ground grain. Potters fire kilns their fathers built. The seals pressed into clay bully change as kings succeed kings, Xerxes, then Artaxerxes, then another Artaxerxes, but the streets themselves barely shift. The city's ordinary life possesses a continuity that outlasts any dynasty, rooted in the ancient soil of the plain, in the river's dependable flow, in the endless human need for bread and shelter and work. This is the Susa that no conqueror's arrival can fully erase. The conqueror arrives in the winter of 331 before the Common Era. Alexander of Macedon has already shattered the Persian army at Gaugamela, already watched Darius III flee eastward into the dust of his collapsing empire. Now the Macedonian columns descend from the passes into the Khuzestan plain, and Susa does not resist. The satrap Abulites surrenders the city and its keys without a siege, without a single arrow loosed from the ancient walls. It is a pragmatic capitulation, and it delivers into Alexander's hands a treasury of staggering magnitude. The sources speak of approximately 50,000 talents of silver bullion stored in the vaults beneath the Apadana complex, along with gold darics, purple dye worth a fortune in itself, and centuries of accumulated royal wealth. This is not merely a war chest. It is the fiscal reserve of an empire that taxed 20 satrapies across 3 continents. Alexander's soldiers carry it out into the winter light. Ingots and coin, textiles and gemstones, and the sheer volume of precious metal released into the Mediterranean economy will depress silver prices for a generation. But Alexander does not burn Susa. Unlike Persepolis, which he puts to the torch months later, Susa is spared. The palace stands. The glazed lions continue their eternal march along the walls. Alexander installs a Macedonian garrison and moves on, but the city's story with the conqueror is not finished. In 324 before the Common Era, he returns to stage the mass wedding at Susa, a ceremony in which perhaps 90 Macedonian officers take Persian and Elamite brides in a single day, a political spectacle meant to fuse ruling classes. The weddings are conducted in Persian fashion, with shared bread and wine. Whatever Alexander's vision of cultural fusion, the marriages largely dissolve after his death the following year. The wars of the successors wash over Susa like floodwater. Seleucus eventually claims the eastern provinces, and under Seleucid administration the city is refounded as Seleucia on the Ulaios, named for the Greek rendering of the river the Persians called the Ulai. The refounding is not destruction. It is a layering. Greek civic institutions are grafted onto the ancient urban body. Archaeological evidence from the Ville Royale mound reveals a transformation in domestic architecture. Courtyard houses begin to incorporate Greek spatial conventions, and Hellenistic pottery, black-glazed bowls, fish plates, mold-made relief wares, appears alongside traditional Elamite forms in the same occupation levels. A Greek-style agora takes shape, likely in the lower city between the great mounds. Inscriptions in Greek appear on public buildings. A gymnasium may have served the settler community, the institution essential to any Greek polis, where young men trained and where civic identity was performed through athletics and philosophical conversation. Yet Elamite and Aramaic do not vanish. Administrative practices carry forward. The temples on the Acropole Mound continue to receive offerings. The city becomes genuinely bilingual, perhaps trilingual, its markets mixing Greek wine amphorae with Mesopotamian date palm products. Through the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, Seleucia on the Eulios functions as a regional capital of the Seleucid East. Coins minted here bear Greek legends and royal portraits in the Hellenistic style. But the Seleucid grip weakens as Parthian power rises on the plateau. By the middle of the 2nd century before the Common Era, the Arsacid dynasty is pressing westward, and Susa stands once again on a contested frontier, the same geographic position that has defined its fate for millennia. The Greek city does not end in a single catastrophe. It thins, shifts, accommodates new masters. The agora falls quiet. The gymnasium empties. But beneath the Hellenistic pavement, the older city endures in its foundations, patient as the alluvial clay from which it was always built. The new masters arrive not as conquerors, but as inheritors. Around 150 before the Common Era, Arsacid Parthian forces absorb Susa into their expanding empire, and the city passes from Greek to Iranian hands with no recorded siege, no burning. The transition is quiet, almost administrative, but it is profound. The agora that Alexander's successors built gradually loses its civic function. Aramaic replaces Greek on commercial documents. The old Elamite name endures, Shushan, spoken now alongside the Parthian designation. The city becomes a regional seat within the Arsacid system, governed by local dynasts who answer to the King of Kings at Ctesiphon. Archaeologically, the Parthian centuries leave a distinctive signature in the Ville Royale mound. Domestic architecture shifts toward courtyard houses with thick mud brick walls and barrel-vaulted rooms, a building tradition rooted in Iranian plateau practice. Pottery changes too. The fine Hellenistic wares give way to heavier, green-glazed vessels with simpler profiles. And beneath the floors of these houses, the dead are laid in terracotta slipper coffins, their lids shaped to suggest the human form, the clay smoothed but unglazed, the bodies placed on their backs with small offerings at their feet. These coffins, recovered by the hundreds, speak of a population that still buries its dead within the living city, a practice ancient at Susa, reaching back thousands of years. Trade continues. Susa sits on routes connecting Mesopotamia to the Iranian highlands, and Parthian-era seal impressions found in the administrative quarter confirm ongoing commercial activity. But the monumental ambition is gone. No new palatial structures rise on the Apadana mound. The great columns of Darius, already damaged by fire and time, stand as ruins within the Parthian city, their broken shafts too massive to remove, too sacred perhaps to dismantle entirely. In 224 of the Common Era, the Sasanian dynasty overthrows the Arsacids, and Susa enters its final ancient transformation. Under Sasanian rule, the city is reorganized as a provincial capital within the administrative district of Khuzestan. New construction appears, but modest compared to the Achaemenid grandeur. Stucco decoration, a hallmark of Sasanian art, adorns interior walls with geometric and vegetal patterns, pressed into wet plaster with carved molds. Fragments recovered from Sasanian period levels show vine scrolls, rosettes, and interlocking circles rendered with precision, but applied to buildings of limited scale. Something else emerges in these centuries that would have astonished the priests of Inshushinak. Christianity reaches Susa. By the 5th century, the city hosts a Nestorian bishopric, and bricks stamped or scratched with crosses appear in the archaeological record. A Christian community worships in a city whose sacred precincts once honored Elamite gods, then Ahura Mazda, then Zeus. The layering is almost geological, faith upon faith, each pressed into the same clay. But the city is shrinking. The great mounds that once supported palaces and temples now carry smaller settlements clustered on their eroded surfaces. The fortification walls are not maintained to their former circuit. The population thins across the Sasanian centuries, drawn perhaps to the newer Sasanian foundations at Gunda Shapur and other regional centers that enjoy imperial favor. Susa is old, impossibly old, and its very antiquity seems to weigh upon it. When the Arab armies arrive in 638 of the Common Era, they find a city that has been diminishing for generations. The conquest is recorded in Islamic sources as relatively swift. The Sasanian garrison resists but falls. The city that once held 50,000 talents of Alexander's plundered silver, that once displayed the stolen trophies of Babylon, that once echoed with the footsteps of the immortals on glazed brick floors, passes into the Islamic world not with a dramatic collapse, but with the quiet exhaustion of a place that has simply outlived its centrality. The tells remain, enormous and silent, holding within their layered clay the compressed memory of nearly 7,000 years of continuous habitation, waiting, though no one alive in that century knows it, for the shovels that will not come for another 1,200 years. The new faith brings new names. Arab geographers call the place Shush, and for a time it functions as a modest administrative center within the province of Khuzestan. The enormous tells, the Acropole, the Apadana Mound, the Ville Royale, the Artisans' Quarter, still rise above the plain like the bones of something immense, but the population that clusters around them is a fraction of what once filled these streets. The glazed brick panels that Darius commissioned, the turquoise and cobalt lions that once lined processional corridors, lie shattered in the debris of upper strata, their fragments working loose from eroding mud-brick walls and tumbling down the slopes of the tells after every winter rain. Under the Umayyad and then the Abbasid caliphates, Shush persists as a regional town. Sugarcane grows in the irrigated lowlands. The Shah River still flows past the base of the ancient mounds, still carrying the same silty water that nourished the first Neolithic farmers nearly 7,000 years before. Medieval Islamic geographers note the town's antiquity. Some mention the tomb of the prophet Daniel, a tradition that draws occasional pilgrims and gives the settlement a thin thread of sacred significance. A modest shrine rises near the riverbank, its cone-shaped roof visible from the surrounding plain, one of the few vertical markers in a landscape otherwise defined by the horizontal sprawl of eroded mounds. But the centuries are not kind. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century devastate Khuzestan, as they devastate so much of the Iranian world. The armies of the great Khans sweep through the lowlands, and what remains of Shus's modest urban fabric is destroyed or abandoned. Irrigation systems that have sustained agriculture on this plain for millennia fall into disrepair. Canals silt up. Fields revert to marsh or dry scrub. The population collapses to a handful of families living in mud brick houses built directly atop the ancient tells, their foundations resting on compressed layers of civilizations they cannot read. By the 15th and 16th centuries, Shus is barely a village. Travelers who pass through the Khuzestan plain note the strange mounds rising from the flat agricultural land, but have no framework for understanding what lies beneath. Fragments of glazed brick, chips of turquoise and gold, litter the surface of the tells. Occasionally a farmer's plough turns up a cylinder seal or a bronze arrowhead. These objects enter local circulation as curiosities, talismans, or are simply discarded. The cuneiform tablets that lie compressed in the lower strata, recording temple offerings and palace inventories in Elamite and Akkadian, remain sealed in darkness. Local legends grow around the mounds. Stories circulate about ancient kings of impossible wealth, about palaces buried beneath the earth, about treasures guarded by spirits. The tomb of Daniel continues to attract visitors, and the shrine is rebuilt and maintained across the centuries, a living thread connecting the Islamic present to a dimly remembered biblical past. But the deeper past, the Proto-Elamite scribes, the Sukalma lords, the Middle Elamite bronze casters, the Achaemenid architects who raised 36 columns 20 meters into the sky, all of this lies silent beneath meters of accumulated debris, wind-blown dust, and collapsed mud brick. The tells erode slowly, their profiles softening with each century. Rain cuts gullies into their flanks. Wind strips the surface and scatters potsherds across the surrounding fields. The mounds shrink imperceptibly, losing centimeters per generation, yet they remain enormous. The acropole rising some 25 meters above the plain, the Apadana mound nearly as high. Seen from a distance in the flat light of the Khuzestan afternoon, they resemble natural hills. Nothing about their weathered surfaces announces what they contain. 9,000 years of human habitation compressed into stratified clay, waiting in absolute silence, beneath the feet of goatherds and pilgrims who walk across them without knowing they tread on the floors of vanished empires. The first European to cut into these silent mounds arrives in 1851. William Kennett Loftus, a British geologist attached to a boundary commission surveying the Ottoman Persian frontier, recognizes the tells for what they are. He sinks trial trenches into the acropole and the Apadana mound, unearthing glazed brick fragments in turquoise and gold, column bases of grey limestone, and pottery spanning millennia. His excavations are brief, his resources limited, but his published accounts alert the scholarly world that something immense lies buried on the Khuzestan plain. 3 decades pass before the mounds are opened again. In 1884, Marcel Auguste Dieulafour and his wife Jane arrive with a French expedition and begin systematic work on the Apadana mound. They expose sections of the great archer frieze, glazed brick panels depicting the royal guard in profile, their robes patterned in white and yellow against deep blue backgrounds, their spears held upright, their expressions serene across 24 centuries. The Dieulafour carefully dismantled these panels, crate them, and ship them down the Karun River to the Persian Gulf, and onward to Paris. The archer frieze enters the Louvre, where it remains, Susa's first resurrection, fragment by luminous fragment, under museum light far from the plain where it was fired. The transformation comes with Jacques de Morgan. Arriving in 1897 as director of the French archaeological delegation, de Morgan brings industrial-scale ambition. His workers number in the hundreds. They drive deep shafts into the Acropole mound, cutting through strata that compress millennia into meters of compacted earth. In the winter of 1901 to 1902, his team uncovers a tall black diorite stele buried among other Mesopotamian trophies. Cleaned of its encasing clay, the stone reveals 282 laws inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform beneath a relief of King Hammurabi receiving authority from the sun god Shamash. The Code of Hammurabi, carved in Babylon around 1750 before the Common Era, seized by Shutruk-Nahunta 6 centuries later, buried at Susa for 3,000 years, emerges into daylight. It is among the most consequential archaeological discoveries ever made, reshaping the understanding of ancient law, literacy, and governance. Roland de Mechanem continues work through the early 20th century, methodically excavating the Ville Royale residential quarter and recovering thousands of administrative tablets in Elamite and Akkadian. After the Second World War, Jean Perrault leads campaigns that bring modern stratigraphic discipline to the site, carefully documenting the Chalcolithic painted pottery of the earliest levels, the Proto-Elamite administrative archives, and the full architectural sequence of the Acropole platform. Each generation of excavators peels back another layer, and each layer speaks in a different script, a different tongue, a different century. In 2015, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization inscribes Susa as a World Heritage Site, recognizing nearly 9,000 years of continuous urban life compressed into 4 great mounds on an alluvial plain. The Louvre's Susa galleries hold the archer frieze, the lion panels, the Code of Hammurabi, and thousands of objects that once filled temples, workshops, and palace storerooms. At the site itself, the tells still rise above the modern town of Shush, their eroded flanks scarred by old excavation trenches, their surfaces scattered with potsherds that catch the light of the Khuzestan sun. The stones speak now. They speak in Elamite and Akkadian and Old Persian and Greek. They speak in glazed brick and diorite and painted clay. They tell of a city that stood at the crossroads of worlds for longer than almost any other place on earth, and that refused, even beneath centuries of dust and silence, to be forgotten. Thank you for joining this journey through 9,000 years of Susa's story. If these ancient stones have spoken to you, consider subscribing so you will not miss the next city we bring back from the silence of the deep past.